on today's session, get everybody to consent, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass this session along to our first presenters of the day. We have Dr. Brady Porter, Associate Professor and Director of the Undergraduate Studies at Duquesne University's Bayer School of Natural and Environmental Sciences, Dr. Beth Dakin, and Katie Stupar, Master's student. So without any further ado, Katie, Dr. Porter, Dr. Dakin, the floor is yours.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Crooked Creek water quality and the discovery of a state-threatened fish. Next slide. Okay, so Crooked Creek is a tributary of the Allegheny River. It's located in Armstrong and Indiana counties. It has a drainage area of 292 square miles. The main stem is designated as warm water fishes, and some of the tributaries are designated as cold water fishes. Today we're going to talk about the threats to the water quality of Crooked Creek. We will then go over water chemistry data for a study that we conducted with the Army Corps of Engineers. And we will also be going over the 3RQ water chemistry data as well. Then Dr. Porter will be talking about our electrofishing data that we collected at the Army Corps sites and the rediscovery of the brindled mad tom in this region. Next slide. This is a map that shows the land use in the Crooked Creek Basin. As you can see, it's mostly forested or used for agriculture. There are also very few areas of urban buildup, which is an important thing to note. Okay, next slide. This map shows abandoned mine lands that are present in the Crooked Creek watershed, and as well as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers controlled land, which is Crooked Creek State Park. That's where we conducted our sampling studies. This map shows and also shows impaired streams that have exceeded the TMDL for suspended solids, and this was caused by siltation. Next slide. This map shows active natural gas extraction wells that are present in the watershed, as well as Crooked Creek Lake State Park. While most of the wells are conventional, which is the green dots, you can also see that there's a few unconventional wells. Next slide. To analyze our water quality data, we used mass ratio plots. We used several combinations of chemical ratios and plotted the values present in unconventional gas, conventional oil, and mine drainage. And then we took which is represented by the ellipses, and then we plotted the ratios that were present in our data amongst those known values to identify sources of contamination in the system. And as you can see, most of our plots or our points with our data falls within the ellipse that corresponds to mine drainage. Next slide. These are just two more plots with two different combinations of mass ratios. Once again, most of our points fall within the ellipse that corresponds to mine drainage, while the plot on the left does show some overlap with the conventional oil and conventional gas ellipse. Because the points from the other three ratios fell mostly within the mine drainage, we can conclude that mine drainage is the most prevalent contaminant within the system. And that's it.
All right, so I'm going to pick up from here for Katie, continuing on with our project. So I have been doing the sampling for Crooked Creek as part of Three Rivers Quest since 2013. In our first year of the project, we did our sampling at a site that's near Idaho, Pennsylvania, which is in that lower right-hand corner. So it is well above Crooked Creek Lake that Katie was mentioning in her part of the talk. Then in 2014, we kind of reconsidered where all of our sites should be. And so we moved it downstream to below the reservoir there, where you can see kind of in the upper left-hand corner that Dr. Porter is highlighting for me. And so we refer to that as our Ford City site. Also in the first year or first 2 years of our project, 3RQ was sampling bi-weekly. So we had a little more intensive sampling, and then we scaled it back to monthly sampling. Since a lot of you are already familiar with 3RQ's protocols, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just there's an overview of our field sampling process, as well as the analyses that we get in the lab with PACE Analytical. And then also important is that these sites are co-located with USGS gauges, so we can look up stream flow, discharge, and we can use that to calculate daily load of these different parameters that we're measuring. Next slide, please. And so, as Katie mentioned, Crooked Creek main stem is considered a warm water fishery stream. And so there are associated standards for different water quality parameters that go with that. So I'm just going to quickly go through a few of those that overlap with what we measure for 3RQ. So the first of those is alkalinity, which is important for neutralizing acidic discharges into the stream. So alkalinity actually has a minimum standard of, I believe, 20 milligrams per liter. And you can see that out of, I think, 129 sampling times that I've been out there, it's only gone below that minimum 2 times. So that's a pretty good overall record. Next slide. Dissolved oxygen has a minimum value either of 5 milligrams per liter at any given time, or an average of 5.5 milligrams over a 7-day period. You can see that it did go dip below that during some of the late summer times where the temperatures get really hot. It went below that 4 times below the 5 milligrams per liter, and another 4 times below the 5.5 milligrams 7-day standard. But overall, for the most part, it is a well oxygenated stream. So that is important for the health of aquatic life. Next slide. The pH standard is that the pH for a warm water fishery should be maintained between values of 6 and 9. And again, you can see there's only one time out of the last 7 years where we had a value that was 0.09 below that standard. So again, by and large, it's maintaining a pH right around 7.5, which is pretty healthy. Next slide, not stream. And I lumped the standards for iron and aluminum together because they really kind of show the same thing. And the question I got from this is, what the heck went on February 12th of 2019, where there's a huge spike in both iron and aluminum? Well, if you go to the next slide, you will see this is what was happening on February 12th. There was huge amounts of flooding. And in fact, so this is the site at Crooked Creek where I was taking that sample. And if you go to the next slide, these are a couple of my other sites on that same day. So I had, ankle deep mud at one site, and the Katanning boat launch was entirely submerged. So I think that huge spike is really an artifact of the flooding that was going on that day. Next slide. And this is, if you take away that one point, this is what you see as far as iron and aluminum for the rest of the time at Crooked Creek. You can see that the vast majority of days, we don't even detect iron or aluminum in our water quality samples. And when we do detect it, it's well below the standards. So that's good news again. Next slide. Water temperature has a little more complex standards because obviously you expect even a warm water fishery to be much warmer in the summer and cooler in the winter. So there are standards that change by the month of the year and even the days within the month. So the orange line here is showing the maximum temperature standard on each sampling day, and the blue is what we observed. So we did exceed the maximum temperature limits 3 times, and I put little red arrows showing where those are. And you can see the exceedance is not by a whole lot, and all 3 of them occurred during the spring. So I would guess that it was just that we happened to have a little bit of a warm spell during the spring when I happened to be out there sampling. So again, by and large, the temperatures are appropriate for a healthy warm water fisheries system. Next slide. And these slides should look very familiar from what Katie just presented. This is the same mass ratio analysis. Unfortunately, unlike Dr. Stoltz's lab, PACE Analytical does not analyze our samples for lithium, so we can't do all 4 of the ratios she showed. But for the 2 ratios we are able to do, again, we see not only do all of our sampling points from Crooked Creek group very tightly together. They are, like Katie's samples, contained pretty much within the mine drainage ovals that are represented in orange. And then on the right there, you can see some of this points are in green and some are in red. The green is just the samples from that first year in Idaho, and the red ones are the downstream samples in Ford City. And again, just showing that they group together. And so there's not really a different influence that's going on in the upstream versus downstream sampling sites between those 2 years. So I believe that's all I had to say, and I will turn it over to Brady to talk about fish.
Great, thank you, Beth. So this project got started with URQ and the data that Beth just presented, and then that led to funding from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who contracted us to do fish surveys, electrofishing, and to continue to take water quality at these electrofishing sites. So we, over the last 2 summers, we've electrofished 8 survey sites throughout the Crooked Creek system. 2 of them are replicate sites down below the dam on the main stem. There's some tributary sites in Pine Run and Sherry Run above the reservoir. And then there's some main stem sites up above the dam. And this is all within just a small amount of property controlled by the Army Corps of Engineers. So we did a standard backpack electrofishing. We had 1 or 2 seines, we had dip nets, and we captured all the fish that we could and measured them and weighed them and enumerated them. Okay, so in general, from these 8 sites, we captured representatives from 11 fish families, 50 species of fish all in all, over 5,000 individuals that we looked through. Typically species per site, number of species per site ranged from 6 in Pine Run, a little headwater tributary, to 32 in the main stem down below the dam. And individuals per site varied from, again, up in the small headwaters of Pine Run, the 300s to over 1,000 individuals down below the dam. And we utilize a parameter called index of biotic integrity that summarizes different feeding guilds and breeding guilds and so forth, and community structure. And this gives us a number out of 60 total possible. And these sites ranged from marginally good, a score of 42 out of 60, to exceptional 56 out of 60, depending on where those sites are. And I'll just give you a quick example of an IBI here for below the dam, and then the 3 main stem sites here. And you can see that below the dam's very good to exceptional, above the dam is very good to marginally good. So according to the fish data, there's somewhat degraded water quality up above the reservoir in the main stem compared to down below. But realize there's a dam between these, and the stuff down below gets influenced from fish traveling from the Allegheny River upstream. I'm not going to go through the rest of these IBIs. They're similar. I'm going to skip to the chase of the very interesting fish catches, the rare fish that we found in Crooked Creek. The blue breast darter and the gilt darter were fish that were considered to be threatened in Pennsylvania until 2015. Largely work of Tony Honeck down here, showing that, you know, blue breast darter through Pennsylvania and Ohio started in the 80s or pre-80s with just isolated sites, and then we discovered it was really increasing its range throughout the entire Ohio system. And so we expect, since we found these below the dam, we expect these are migrating up from the Allegheny River. And the gilt darter is found more in the upper Allegheny. Here's Crooked Creek. We didn't actually find it in Crooked Creek ever before, but this adds a new site right here at below the dam. And we expect this is migrating up from there as well. Other interesting fish of note, the least brook lamprey. Most people, when they think of lampreys, they think of a parasitic fish, and some of them are, but this particular group of lampreys are non-parasitic. They live almost their entire life as what we call an amosete, a larval form that filter feeds, lives in the sand and filter feeds for many years, then finally transforms with its sectorial mouth only to make a nest, spawn, and die. So these are very interesting little lampreys that are under a foot long. And they are candidate species in Pennsylvania. There may be some interesting genetics uniqueness of the ones that we have. From the fishes of Pennsylvania, they're kind of clustered down here in the lower Allegheny and tributaries in the Kiski-Conemaugh system and Crooked Creek and so forth. So it's not all that surprising that we found them, but it's good. They're good finds in Cherry Run and in Crooked Creek up in above the reservoir. Finally, the star of the show, the brindled mad tom. It's considered to be threatened in Pennsylvania. There's only a very few sites, some up in Erie drainage and some down in Wheeling area. And this strange little one site here, which is in Crooked Creek, pre-1940s. When you track this down, Henry Weed Fowler had cited a McConnell discovery in 1905. So that's the last time it's been seen in this region of the Allegheny. And all he said is Crooked Creek in the area of Indiana County or Indiana. So they put that square there. It has never been seen in this system since until our surveys in 2000 and 2021 and 2020. And so we found it in 3 different sites. We found 6 individuals at the Mill Hill site, which is more around here. And all of these are right around this area. 3 individuals from Porter's Road site and 1 individual from the Iron Bridge. And you can notice that these individuals go from about 39 or 40 millimeters, which are juveniles, all the way up to adults. So this is a nice, healthy population. And this fish is kind of rediscovered from the dead. No one knew it was there. And I think it's really exciting. Here's a number of them from the Porter's Bridge. No, this must be from the Mill Hill collection right here. You can see they're really small types of catfish. All right, so wrapping it up, overall, the water quality in the watershed is very good to good. What we can detect by our water quality analyses is that AMD still appears to be detectable impact on the water quality. The fish surveys indicate that there's great thriving communities and including ones of rare and imperiled fish. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat right now.
Oh, wait, I have a question. Hang on a second. Hey, so listen, the ellipses that you guys had on those graphs, right, that you guys did for the Crooked Creek, your mass ratio plots. Mm-hmm. Love those. They're super awesome. Is there a way we can talk about this later and perhaps adding something like this onto waters and or our maps, if we can get the background from you?
Absolutely. Yeah. This is what Dr. Stoltz's group and Dr. Cantelet have worked out. Those references for how they were done are all in here, which we're certainly happy to share with you. And we have it kind of worked out in spreadsheets to be able to do that. So
yeah, we can talk about that later. That'd be super awesome because they're really nice graphs. They're really well done and they're so easy visually. You look at them, you know immediately what you're looking at. So that was the point.
That's thousands.
Of course.
Those ellipses represent thousands of points, both our
Right.
data as well as, archival data from other sources. So, and they're statistically robust.
Yeah, no, they're awesome. And again, they would be really useful for a lot of 3RQ users for on the maps and even in waters. So yeah, if we can catch up with you guys later on that and just get your methodology, maybe I can incorporate that.
Great, thanks.
One of my other students also has those, Riley Williams, who's also been supported by 3RQ, has those types of plots for Buffalo Creek as well. So the Buffalo Creek in Armstrong County. And they show a little bit of indication of oil and gas, but mostly abandoned mine as well.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things we like to put up on the maps so that as the public comes through, they're easily understandable by just about anybody. So yeah, nice job. I just wanted to say nice job on this.
Great. Yeah, it was an extremely informative presentation with exciting data. So thank you all for sharing. We really appreciate it. And it doesn't look like I have any questions or comments, but please feel free to type anything in the chat and we will go ahead and address them at the end of all of our pieces to move forward as we get more information. So last but certainly not least, we're going to jump into our last presentation, and this is going to be from Dr. James Wood, Assistant Professor of Biology at West Liberty University, and undergraduate student Emily Huff, who will be presenting on the trends in surface water conductivity and chloride in tributaries of the Ohio River near Wheeling, West Virginia. So Dr. Wood and Emily, the floor is yours.
All right, I see. Hopefully that's sharing. All right, so thank you very much. I want to give a shout out here to Emily Huff, who's collected a large percentage of this data as an undergrad and then working on Wheeling Creek and as a master's student also. And so I'm going to talk about a couple years worth of data we've got from Wheeling Creek, Short Creek, and Buffalo Creek. And this is a different Buffalo Creek than Dr. Porter spoke about. So these are all in Wheeling or near Wheeling. No, why can't I? There we go. So our water quality monitoring data program is very basic. We've got water chemistry data that we're collecting with a handheld Quattro. We've also collected some algal data. I'll only be talking about the water chemistry data, but we've also got E. coli and macroinvertebrate data that we've worked with and collected in different streams and tributaries around here. Wheeling Creek, if you're unfamiliar with it, starts over in southwestern Pennsylvania. So just up here is Washington, PA, and then down here is Aleppo Township. And these are the headwaters as they flow down across the border. Wheeling Creek obviously gets bigger. And so as the point that it gets through Wheeling, it's a pretty good sized tributary to the Ohio and is kind of known for poor water quality. This is a picture of it. It's, I believe it's considered a 6th order stream. Lots of old infrastructure. North of it is Buffalo Creek. This also starts over here in PA. So again, this is Washington over on the right, and then flows westward into the Ohio. And I don't have any good pictures of it, but nestled between Buffalo Creek to the north and Wheeling Creek to the south is a smaller watershed called Short Creek. And this is a very interesting one to me because of some of the water quality trends we've seen in it. And something to point out is that West Liberty University is up here, up on the headwaters of it. And then down here, there's a fairly large mine. We've got sites above and below that mine. Also in our data set, we've got some acid mine drainage streams. Over on the left is one called Glenn's Run. We call it Cherry Hill Creek because it runs along Cherry Hill Road. This is a direct tributary to the Ohio. And as you can see, it's notably discolored with yellow boy. It's not in great condition. Over on the right is a much smaller tributary to Wheeling Creek. It's an unnamed tributary impacted by acid mine drainage. And interestingly, it usually maintains this white color. And if anyone knows exactly what causes that, is it aluminum? I'd be interested to hear. But these are two of the sites that we've been monitoring. They give us some interesting kind of outlier data. And then this is one of the tributaries to Short Creek. This is called North Fork and is one of the better creeks. It's also right down the hill from West Liberty. But in general, this is what Short Creek looks like. Overall water quality seems to be fairly clear, even though there's some funny chemistry things going on. So our data collection is primarily weekly, as much as we can do that. Said it's handheld based, using temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, conductance, chloride, turbidity, and chlorophyll A. And today what I'm going to speak about is the trends in conductivity and chloride that we've seen while we've been collecting this data. So here is Wheeling Creek conductivity data. Over here on the far left is when we first started collecting data in May of 2019. And over on the right is data from end of November. And what I've got shown here are several different several different sampling sites on the creek. The order is not upstream to downstream. And Emily, correct me if I'm wrong here, but is 3 the most downstream site?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And what is the most upstream site?
It's 9.
9. Okay. So 3 in red is the most downstream, 9 in blue is the most upstream. And one of the things I just want to point out is this interesting seasonal oscillation that we're seeing in conductivity. Generally in the winter months, we're somewhere fairly low, below 400, while in the summer months, we're up here closer to 600. And it seems as if that's a pattern that holds itself up as Wheeling Creek comes through the lower sections through the greater Wheeling area. If we look at a couple of tributaries to the Ohio, including some acid mine drainage sites, so this CHCR in red, this is the acid mine drainage stream called Cherry Hill, the one that I showed you that was orange. It has extremely high conductivity coming in and dumps directly into the Ohio River in the Warwood community. We have another tributary called Caldwell Stream, the CSCR, that comes in through Wheeling. It's got your trifecta of issues going on: acid mine drainage combined with untreated sewage, combined with a lot of being put in culverts. So there's only a very short section of the creek that's actually sees daylight at all. And we haven't caught much for invertebrates in there. And I would say it's extremely impaired also. And then as we go down, this is the most downstream site on Wheeling Creek that we have. You can see it kind of oscillates here around the 500 point. And then both of our sites on Ohio River, both in Wheeling and Warwood, are on average somewhere around 100 to 200 microsiemens per centimeter lower in conductivity compared to Wheeling Creek, and definitely lower than these other tributaries that are coming in. There's some patterns, seasonal patterns in the Ohio River, but they're much weaker than what we're seeing in some of the tributaries. And I do just want to point out this large spike in conductivity we observed over the summer of 2020. And if you remember back then, it was a pretty dry summer. And at this site particularly, conductivity got extremely high. If we hop north and look at our Buffalo Creek watershed, conductivity in the main stem, BFCR02 in red, is similar, but often a little bit lower than Wheeling Creek is. And then a tributary to it on Castleman's Run tends to follow those patterns pretty shortly. Again, we're seeing during 2020, we had a pretty big increase in conductivity, and this general pattern of conductivity dropping down a little bit in the winter months. And then summer of 2021, not nearly as dry, and conductivity still went up, but not quite as much as we saw, and not quite as long as we saw in 2020. And so then if we look at Short Creek, this one's got a lot of interesting things going on. So let me first start out with this. Can you all see my cursor? Okay, so the WRCR, this is a small tributary and is our most forested site really around here. It's a first order true headwater streams, and you can see the conductivity stays pretty low throughout the year, usually sitting around 3, maybe 400. And then as we move down North Fork, and North Fork 3 here is our most upstream site, conductivity starts creeping up just a little bit. And then as we go from the headwaters to the North Fork 3 in green to North Fork 2 in this yellow, you can see this increase in conductivity as we go down through North Fork. And so North Fork 1 down here in red, this is a site that's down by the landfill run by Republic just before North Fork runs into Short Creek. The Short Creek 5 and 2 and 6 and these kind of teal and purple colors, these are the sites that are below the mine. And these sites have very high conductivity. I don't have it in this presentation, but we put some loggers out in these sites and saw a very rhythmic pulsing of conductivity and chloride coming out of the mine. And compared to the more upstream Short Creek site here, Short Creek 5 in blue, which is pretty similar to the North Fork sites, all above the mine, this increase here is pretty directly attributable to from the mine activity. So we're seeing an increase of several hundred to over 1,000 caused specifically from that mine and just overall conductivity. So what you're looking at here are the medians and the ranges from summer 2020 to 2019 to 2020. Is that right, Emily?
Yeah, 19 to 20.
Okay. And we define summer in this as starting at June 1st and ending on September 30th. And so summer 2019 is in the light gray and summer 2020 is in the black box. And all the ones marked with the star is where we saw a significant difference in the conductivity between those two summers. And overall, so North National Road site here, this is one of our AMD sites, rather big increase of about 1,000 microsiemens per centimeter and conductivity there. Our other site here, Cherry Hill, very large increase in conductivity during that dry summer of 2020. And then many of the other sites also saw increases in conductivity. Many of our sites on Wheeling Creek and on Buffalo Creek, as well as in the Ohio River, also had a significant increase in conductivity from 2019 to 2020. And overall, about 58% of our sites saw an increase between the two summers. Emily and I looked at this in a little bit of detail and plotted out what we thought might be going on. And so in that summer of 2019, I've covered up my discharge. I'm not sure what that is. That'd be 100 and 1,000 right here. So in summer of 2019, which was a pretty average summer when we went back and looked at the record, the discharge over that summer period shown under this kind of blue box here was somewhere in the 200 to 300 cubic feet per second range. And if you look over here during 2020, there was a rather notable and precipitous decline in discharge in Wheeling Creek at the point that at the end of September, we were down here around 20 CFS compared to 200. And then over on the left here, you've got a couple of the sites that we just looked at. And all I did is mark out where the 2019 conductivity was compared to the 2020 conductivity. And the background line is just that trend in conductivity from one summer to the next. And so these were all significantly different. And the ones marked up here with the asterisks are some of the acid mine drainage streams. So what Emily and I have more recently been working on is looking at any changes we might be seeing during the winter. And so this was the winter of 19 to 20 versus 20 to 21. And again, the little stars down here indicate significant differences in conductivity between those two winters. And what was really interesting is that we saw this general increase in conductivity between those two winters in 2019 to 2020. the winter of 19 to 20 versus the winter of 20 to 21. And we saw that at 86% of the sites. So a kind of across the board increase in conductivity between those two winters. If we want to look at chloride in Wheeling Creek in the Ohio, we get some similar, but some also slightly different patterns. So the Ohio River is going to be in these green and kind of tealish colors, along with, and those are going to run down here at the bottom. Wheeling Creek 3, and the Wheeling Creek sites also pretty low down here, and all of them are following a similar pattern. What's interesting to me is that what we're generally seeing is the highest chloride level showing up somewhere in winter and then declining through the summer and then peaking again. The brownish orange and red are two of those acid mine drainage streams. Again, very high in chloride, following the same patterns as the other streams, but much higher. And then our Wheeling Creek 7 site. Emily, remind me which one that is again?
Number 7?
Yeah.
It's by the laundromat in Elm Grove.
All right, so this is one that is located right before Wheeling Creek runs into kind of the main areas of downtown. And you can see we're starting to see some notable spikes in chloride as we're going out and sampling that in those winter months. And just a general pattern of increasing chloride during those winter months. But again, what Wheeling Creek is contributing is substantially more than what the Ohio River is supporting, and our AMD sites are contributing the highest amounts of chloride. Buffalo Creek watershed is notably lower in chloride. So I want to point out the scale here is around 25 to 50 versus back here, we were looking at 100 to 200 at the high end. And so if 50 is between here, that's going to be what Wheeling Creek and the Ohio River are roughly at, except for this January of 21. And so we still see that peak during January 21, but it's still quite a bit below what we were seeing in Wheeling Creek. The tributary to Buffalo Creek that we're monitoring, Castleman's Run, is consistently lower in chloride compared to the main stem, which shouldn't be too surprising. The watershed itself is more forested. And then again, if we look at Short Creek, our patterns get quite interesting. Again, our best reference down here is the headwater stream, the WRCR, in kind of a pinkish color, very low throughout the year and very minimal seasonal changes. And then as we start to move downstream with the most upstream site in North Fork, we start picking up chloride and see quite a bit of increase in chloride as we get down towards where North Fork joins Short Creek. And I should point out that the road for North Fork is right along the stream, and all the development on this stream is really directly along the riverbanks. So there's very little, if any, buffer between the development and the creek. As we move into Short Creek and get below the mine, these rhythmic pulses we can actually see on an hourly basis show up, but also just a day-to-day variation of high concentrations of chloride being put in by the mine. And so your reference of below the mine are in purple and green, and then above the mine is going to be in this blue, much more similar to what we're seeing in North Fork also. So this these very high levels are directly caused by the mine. So when we looked at differences in chloride between 2019 and 2020 over the summer, about 90% of our sites had increases in chloride between the two summers, which we thought was pretty interesting. Can speculate a little bit about what might be driving that. Potentially, this is salt building up in groundwater, and then during low flow conditions, these higher concentrations of chloride are moving into the stream channel. But I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on what's driving changes in chloride in summer flows from year to year. And then between the winter of 2019 and the winter, 2019 to 2020, and the winter of 2020 to 2021, all of our sites saw a significant increase in chloride concentrations. Some of them, particularly this acid mine drainage stream, went from less than 200 to just under 600, so a very large increase. This WDCR is a small tributary to Wheeling Creek that comes to the neighborhood of Woodsdale. So it has lots of urbanization around it at the bottom end. And if you remember the winter of 2020 to 2021, we had a lot of snow compared to the previous winter. And we think that's driving this pattern here, is these snowy winters are directly causing an increase in chloride concentrations in the stream. So I looked at the relationship between chloride and specific conductance in the summer months, and there's a pretty good correlation between those two. We've got an R squared of, this is 2019 in black and 2020 in red. And when I compared that to what we were seeing in the 19 to 20 winter versus the 20 to 21 winter, much less correlation in the winter months between conductivity and chloride compared to the summer months. When I remove this one outlier point, which is one of the Short Creek mine sites, that R squared drops down quite a bit. So I just found it surprising that there's a stronger correlation with between specific conductance and chloride in the summer compared to the winter. I would have guessed winter would be stronger with road salt use, but I appear to be wrong. I took 20 sites and plotted out the conductivity of the chloride relationships, and I've got them color coded here by watershed. So these really high ones, this is the Short Creek watershed with the mining going on. The blue is going to be Wheeling Creek. The orange down here is Buffalo Creek. And then the red down here is the Ohio River. And in general, you can see how these different watersheds shake out in terms of the Ohio River generally lower in conductivity and chloride compared to the tributaries, Buffalo Creek being in the next best condition, then Wheeling Creek starting to get high at certain sites, and then Short Creek frequently very high in chloride and conductivity. And I took the slope of those relationships at the different sites in the watershed and plotted them against land use. And so this is a little confusing, and feel free to tell me this is the wrong way to do it. But what I was curious is whether or not these chloride concentrations were driving the overall changes in conductance. And so these sites on the far end are higher forest cover. Gray is Short Creek. Blue is Wheeling Creek. We've got some variation there. Red is the Ohio River, and orange are Buffalo Creek sites. And these higher slopes, if I'm interpreting this right, would be a decrease in the contribution of chloride to specific conductance as forest cover increases. And that would be an indication that more of the conductivity in those highly forested sites is coming from something other than chloride. And that was particularly surprising to me, given the high concentrations of chloride we saw in some of these Short Creek sites. But then again, their conductivity was also extremely high. I took the same chloride to specific conductant relationship and plotted against development, and got the opposite pattern, that in our more developed watersheds, we have a higher concentration of chloride to the specific conductance. And so here we've got some of these Wheeling Creek sites that have more development, and they have higher concentrations of chloride relative to conductance compared to these less developed sites over on this side. And then here are these Ohio River sites. So the overall conclusions I get from this is that many of our streams are high in specific conductance and chloride. Most of them are over the 300 microsiemens per centimeter level that I've seen cited for levels of impairment for macroinvertebrates, and definitely higher than our chloride. We do have some seasonal changes that we can observe in specific conductance and chloride. Most specifically, a general decrease in SPC in the winter and increases in the summer, and then the opposite trend going on with chloride, increases in the winter and decreases in the summer. And then we do see some relationships with land use and season on this relationship between specific conductance and chloride. And so with that, I'd like to thank all the folks who've helped collect this data, as well as Three Rivers Quest, Pollution Control Department, and Washington County Conservation District. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dr. Wood. Really informative presentation. Before we jump to questions, we are a little bit over our time, so I just want to offer any quick preview for our next session before we jump into questions, just to allow anyone that needs to go to have time. So thank you again for our presenters today. So much information. I hope you all found it extremely valuable. And we also want to thank our attendees for joining us today. We hope that you found this session extremely interesting and beneficial. And don't forget to mark your calendars for the next session and the final session of the 3RQ Reach Roundtable Series, which will take place Thursday, February 3rd from 10 to 11 a.m. Same time in 1 month, basically. So I'm going to drop that into the chat right now for anybody that is on a schedule today. And then with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to answer some questions. So I have one question. Unfortunately, Jason had to run to another meeting, but he did have a question for Dr. Wood in regards to having a watershed-based plan for Wheeling Creek.
So the question is there a watershed-based plan?
Correct.
As far as I know, there is not a watershed-based plan for Wheeling Creek right now. It is something that several of us are working on, is trying to figure out what is really going on in Wheeling Creek and how to address the issues. What are the specific issues? Been working with the Pollution Control Department on the E. coli project to help try to identify sources of E. coli. Most specifically, are they coming from sewage leaks? And also working with them on trying to deal with stormwater issues. So there is no basin-wide plan as far as I know of. Jindan is working in the headwaters. And so hopefully over the next little while, we can come up with some more comprehensive plans on improving water quality in the creek.
Perfect. And Brandon actually ended up making a comment in the chat, said, Joe and James, I would offer that Brent Means of the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement may provide some insights into your chemistry and correlation questions, and then offered an email for contact. And that is within the chat. And then Brady had a comment in the chat. James, we had similar conductance chloride correlations in the Pine Creek system, tributary to the Allegheny River in Allegheny County. If you don't already have it, Selena Pretner's MS thesis from Duquesne might give us more insight into how chloride remains high in these systems year round.
Good info.
And then we have one question from Martin in the chat. Do the concentration ratio ellipses distinguish mine drainage polluted waters from unpolluted waters? Where do samples of reference stream water fall on those ellipse graphs?
That's more of a question for John Stoltz, who just got off. I do have some ellipses that are labeled surface waters, but I don't know where he got those surface waters from. So I don't know if those are unpolluted reference streams or just generalized samples from around the region. So I can't ask, but I'm sure John could answer that. His email is stolz@duq.edu.
Can you say that one more time? I'm just going to type it in the chat.
His last name, stolz@duq.edu.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, are there any other questions or comments before we go ahead and we finish the just copying this email really quick. DQ.edu. There we go. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions or comments. So I just want to thank everyone again for being here today, all of our presenters, all of the amazing presentations. It was just a wealth of information, and all of our attendees for joining us. And I really hope that you all have a great rest of your Thursday and an amazing weekend ahead. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.